Hello, I'm Ngo Chu Ye. I'm from September 21 Enterprise in Singapore. My company actually deals in early childhood education, and I'm very proud and very happy to tell you all that we'll be celebrating our 21 years in education this year in September. And because of this opportunity, I've flown all the way from Singapore to this very beautiful country, London in UK, to meet this very famous author that my company and me have been admiring all these years. Her name is Pat Hutchins. I'm sure all of you know who she is. She's the author of the very famous book, Rosie Walk, and of course, The Wind Blew. Thank you, Pat, for accepting this interview. I'm very honored.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to be involved in your 21st birthday celebrations. And thank you so much for inviting me to join you. And I send lots of love to you all.
Pat, you have written so many books, like I think it's more than 50 books. What is your most favorite book?
Well, that's difficult because it's usually the book you're working on at the moment. But I think if I were pushed, it would have to be Titch.
What was your growing years like?
Well, I always loved drawing, and I had a pet crow when I was little, and I used to take him across the fields into the countryside and took a sketchbook with me and do a lot of drawings. So I really enjoyed drawing the countryside from being very little. Very little, I loved drawing.
Do you like to draw and doodle as a child?
Oh, yes, all the time, yeah. Always drawing.
How did you actually start writing?
Well, again, I love writing stories, and when I was little, I used to write stories. I read a lot, and I would write stories, and then it made sense to do little drawings to go with the story.
Have any stories or character been inspired by situation that you have encountered or children or people that you know?
The Wind Blew, this is actually set in my the village where I grew up. I used to always do drawings of the church, the local church. And there used to be a competition every year in the village for a drawing competition. And I always used to draw the church, so I got pretty good at drawing the church. Also, the vicar who ran the church, he was one of the judges, so I always used to win first prize because I used to draw the church every year. And that's my husband Lawrence. That's supposed to be me. And here, this lady here is an old elderly friend. Well, she's since passed away, but Mrs. Bruce, friend there. So, and it's a bit mixed up. I've got bits of London in it and bits of the countryside as well. This is a little village where I grew up. So yes, I do use people and places that I know.
Could you share how some of the story come about?
Well, the very worst monster, my niece, when she was about 4 or 5 years old, her mum was expecting another baby. And I asked her what she was going to do with the baby when it arrived. And she said that she was going to give it away. So I thought it would be nice to write a story about somebody who gives their baby brother away. But I didn't want it to be a real child because I wanted it to be a funny, reassuring book. And I know lots of little children feel guilty because they've pushed their little, brother or sister down the stairs or whatever out of jealousy. So I thought if I made them monsters, the characters, rather than real children, monsters are supposed to behave badly and do naughty things. So, and I made it funny, deliberately funny. So and to distance it from reality, also turn them into monsters. So the children know it's one big joke from beginning to end.
How long does it take to write a book?
It depends on the story. I mean, some books have taken me 10 years because I've had an idea for a story, but it didn't work out at the time. But my editor always said, never throw an idea away, just, file it. Eventually you might have an idea and you think, that situation. For example, I did a book called One-Eyed Jake, which is about this horrible pirate. And I wanted to do a book about balance, and I started doing a sort of Noah's Ark book. But then at the end of it, all the animals got drowned, which wasn't very nice ending for a children's book. So I put the idea away. But many years later, I thought, well, if I used displacement instead. So there's this greedy pirate who keeps robbing other people's boats and for treasure. And then he gets so much treasure that the boat starts to sink. So then he has to get rid of one of his crew to balance it out. But it has a happy ending because he's such a horrible pirate and they don't want to be on his boat. So he throws his cook over to this luxury liner where he can be the best cook in the world. And then in the end, because he's got rid of all of them, and still weighted down, and the little cabin boy who's been thrown onto a fishing boat throws the key to the cabin to him, and just the weight of that key sinks the boat, so the pirate goes down with the boat. And it worked that way, but it didn't work with... He didn't drown, I don't think. I think children always say at the end, did he drown? And I've drawn a shark in the water. Did he get eaten by sharks? I said, well, I think he might have made it to the island, but they like to think he was eaten by a shark. But and then again, I can have an idea in the morning, and it just goes like that, and I've got the idea for the story. So it depends. It can take a long time, or you can do it in a day, if you're lucky. The hardest part's having the idea.
How long does it take you and Lawrence to illustrate a book?
Again, it depends. Some of the books are in line, and once you've drawn the line, it doesn't take that long. So you could perhaps do the illustrations in maybe 4 or 5 months. But again, coming back to, for example, The Very Worst Monster, because these are all watercolours, it's much, much more complicated. So it could probably take me 3 days or 4 days just to do, maybe even longer, to do one drawing. Also, if you make a mistake with watercolour, you can't alter it. It's very difficult to alter because with watercolour, it's the colour's translucent. And if you're using ordinary paint, you can put white paint on it to cover up the mistake you've made. But you can't really do that with watercolour because it would make it look odd.
What target age group do you like to focus on when writing your books?
I don't. When I'm writing, I write for myself, and I try to keep the language simple enough that the child can follow the story but can understand what I'm trying to say. But I wouldn't say I'm writing a book for a 5-year-old. Well, obviously, if I'm writing a book for an older children, I would say it was for an older child, maybe between the age of 7 and 9, because they all have different reading abilities, children. And I don't like putting labels on them. I think the child knows best what book they want to read.
Have any books that you have written come from your childhood memories?
The Wind Blew, I suppose. No.
Has it been easier for you to write and illustrate your own books?
Well, obviously, in lots of ways it is, because you're in control of it. But sometimes, for example, in the longer books that Lawrence illustrates, well, I couldn't do that type of illustration that's needed for that particular story. I wouldn't be able to do that kind of illustration. So, I would leave that to someone else to do.
We heard that you started as an illustrator. So when do you actually start to both writing and illustrating your own books?
Well, I always wanted to be an illustrator, and I decided I wanted to illustrate children's books quite early, actually. And my first job was in advertising. Well, my only other job was in advertising. I had a very nice boss, and he knew that I wanted to illustrate books. So if we weren't busy, he'd sort of leave me alone, and I could, work on my illustrations and writing. because I love writing. I mean, I still love writing.
Is there any significant event in your life that has influenced your writing?
I suppose having children probably did, because you're much closer to not only them but their friends, and also it keeps you up to date. Mostly it's your own childhood that affects your writing, but if you've got children and their friends around, then it keeps you up to date with the language they're using at the moment, and it helps a lot to have kids around you.
This one is really from your favorite fan, Victoria Carlton. She says, your books really delight children. Do you try them on children you know before you had them published?
No. Big no. For example, Morgan always loved space things, and Sam always loved animals. And if I were to read a book to one of them, they'd say, yeah, it'd be great, one about space. This would be great if it had animals in it. And the other one would say, yeah, great if it had a spaceship in it. So, no, I think you have to please yourself.
Did any of your editors or publisher ever change your story to such an extent that you disagree with it?
No. No, they wouldn't do that. Certainly my editors wouldn't do that. And if they did, which they wouldn't do, then I would, I'm easygoing, but if it was my story, it's my story.
What kind of books do you generally like to read?
I read a lot, very variedly. I mean, you're tripping over books in my house. Everything I can lay my hands on.
Who in this world inspire or has inspired you?
I think it's more people who've inspired me than, people who've helped me and maybe teachers.
This is a funny one meant for Morgan. Which one of your sons was Stitch based on?
Ooh.
Dangerous question, this one.
Very dangerous question. Now, yes, practically caused a riot in our house, this question, because my mother was convinced it was Sam, and then Morgan had to point out to my mother that Sam wasn't even born when the first Stitch was written. So, but to be fair, they're both, the original Titch is Morgan, but then you'll soon grow into them Titch is Sam. So, to work it out for yourselves.
You have used the same publisher for years. This shows a strong sense of responsibility, loyalty, and integrity. These are my company core values, which enable our company to be a leading supplier in early childhood education. What would you consider to be your best virtue?
I'm not sure I have one.
Modesty.
No. I suppose I'm I don't like to give up easily. Stubbornness, probably.
If you were not an author or illustrator, what career would you have chosen?
Well, if I could sing, I would have liked to have been a singer or worked with music or dance, any of the arts.
What advice would you give aspiring writers and illustrators?
Just keep at it. It's not easy. It's getting harder and harder now I'm sure you know, to get work published. For cutting right back on everything. And I think you've just got to keep at it. And if you're good, you'll make it. And if you're not, you won't. So.
Teachers, parents, children around the world all love your books. Any plans for more?
Well, fingers crossed. There's a book at the moment at the publishers, but I'm waiting to hear about that. Hopefully.